Well, good morning and welcome to the 173rd Landon Lecture on Public Affairs. The Landon Lectures began in 1966 by the late Governor Alf Landon and the late K-State President James McCain. The goal of the Landon Lectures is to bring the most prominent thought leaders to Kansas State University to discuss the pressing issues of the day. We are pleased this morning to recognize 3 K-State alums. Dr. David Hall, President of the University of the Virgin Islands. Dr. Bud Peterson, President of the Georgia Institute of Technology. And Lieutenant General Bob Caslen, Superintendent, U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Our moderator for today's discussion is Ms. Marae Rose Williams, Education Reporter for the Kansas City Star. At this time, I'd like to introduce some university officials. Dr. April Mason, our provost. Good morning, April. Dr. Jackie Hartman, chairperson of the Landon Lecture Series and chief of staff in the Office of the President. Dr. Barry Flinchball, chair of the Landon Patrons. Dr. Andrew Bennett, President of Faculty Senate and Professor of Mathematics. Carol Martin, President of the University Support Staff Senate. Carol. Jessica Van Rankin, K-State Student Body President and Junior in Political Science. And Trenton Kennedy, K-State Student Body Vice President and Junior in Entrepreneurship. I would also like to introduce the following distinguished guest in the audience, one of our Kansas Board of Regents, Dennis Mullen. Lieutenant General Bob Caslen is a United States Army officer and has served as the 59th Superintendent at West Point since July 17, 2013. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1975 and earned a master's degree in industrial engineering here at Kansas State University in 1989. Before taking his current post, he was chief of the Office of Security Cooperation in Iraq. His prior deployments and assignments including serving as a commander of the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, the command that oversees the Command and General Staff College and 17 other schools, including centers and training programs located throughout the United States, and Commanding General of the 25th Infantry Division and Commanding General of the Multinational Division North during Operation Iraqi Freedom. His awards and decorations include the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Bronze Star Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, and many, many others. Dr. David Hall is the 5th president of the University of the Virgin Islands. Since his appointment, Dr. Hall has worked to raise the image and position of the university. He led efforts to restructure academic units from divisions to colleges and schools, the addition of new academic programs, and the launch of a new Caribbean Center for Green Technology, a center for the study of as well as a Center for the Study of Spirituality and Professionalism, and as an Institute for Leadership and Institutional Effectiveness. Dr. Hall earned a bachelor's degree in political science in 1972 from Kansas State University, where he was named an academic All-American as a member of the men's basketball team. After playing professional basketball in Italy, he went on to earn his law degree from the University of Oklahoma. He also earned a doctorate in judicial science from Harvard Law School. Dr. Bud Peterson is the 11th president of the Georgia Institute of Technology. As president, Dr. Peterson oversees a top 10 public research university with more than 21,500 students and a $730 million in research expenditures. He has served as president since April 1st, 2009. Dr. Peterson earned a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, if I remember right, before I turn the page here. In mechanical engineering in 1975, a bachelor's degree in mathematics in 1977, a master's degree in engineering in 1980, all from Kansas State University. He earned his doctorate in mechanical engineering from Texas A&M. President George W. Bush appointed Dr. Peterson to the National Science Board in 2008, and President Barack Obama reappointed him in 2014. The board oversees the National Science Foundation and advises the President and Congress on national policy related to science. For this morning panelist discussion, we're very lucky to have Ms. Marae Rose Williams, who will serve as our moderator. Ms. Williams is an education reporter for the Kansas City Star and has been with the newspaper for the past 20 years. Please help me welcome our distinguished speakers to Kansas State University.
Good morning. Before we get started with the questions, I want to give our panelists a little bit of time to reflect on their time at K-State. We don't have much time, so I'm not going to take up time. You didn't come here to hear from me. We want to hear from our panelists. Let's start with Dr. Peterson. If you could give us some reflections about your time at K-State.
All right. Well, it was the early 70s. Actually, the way I came to learn about Kansas State is neither of my parents graduated or went to college, let alone graduated from college. And I grew up in Kansas City, and my best friend's dad was a mechanical engineer. He brought us to Manhattan for the engineering open house. It would have been the spring of 1969. And I saw a machine in a movie at that open house. They showed a movie of a machine that peeled a grapefruit. And I thought, I want to do that. I want to do that. And so I came to K-State to get an engineering degree and had a wonderful experience. It shaped my life. It made me who I am today. And I look back on it with fond memories, very fond memories.
Thank you. Dr. Hall?
Well, first of all, good morning to everyone. It is an honor to be a participant in this lecture series and also to share the stage with two distinguished alums of this institution, and it's, excuse me, quite an honor to be here. I first would like to say that I think this panel is so critical because the future of higher education is so critical to the life not only of this nation but also this world. And as I reflect upon my time here at Kansas State University, being an athlete was a very special opportunity for me, but also being involved in leadership positions and involved especially in the Black Student Union allowed me to become the type of leader that I am today. And I reflect fondly upon Kansas State, not because it was perfect, but because it was open to being changed, and open to have individuals like myself and other African-American students who were coming at that time to try to shape this institution and in the process hopefully shape ourselves so that we could have the type of society that we desired. So I look forward to us grappling with some of the types of questions and issues that are not only facing Kansas State, but facing all of higher education, and this is a wonderful opportunity to do so.
Lieutenant General.
Well, thank you very much, Marae, and I too just want to say what an honor it is to be here, and since I've been at Kansas State, I have followed the Landon lectures and the speakers that have passed through here. I'm really humbled to be able to be here. I also have to confess that I'm out of uniform, even though I am in uniform. As much as I want to wear purple, you know, the Army won't let me do it. So I got a little pin stuck in here with the K-State. No, seriously, it's just really great to be here. As General Meyer said, I'm not an undergraduate from Kansas State. I'm a graduate with the University of Engineering co-op program that they had with the Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. If you stay in the Army as an officer, normally around the 10-year mark, you go to this mid-career school at Leavenworth, and it's to study your profession. And Leavenworth had really reached out with some of the other universities within Kansas, particularly Kansas State, and they had this co-op agreement with the Department of Engineering School with industrial engineering, so that you would get a master's degree with industrial engineering. And I knew how important something like that was, and so I signed up for the program. And the Department of Army allowed us to take a second year after you finish Leavenworth to come over here as a resident student, and absolutely enjoyed life here at Kansas State, and it was wonderful to be here. But I think in that particular program, what I learned more than just industrial engineering was it really taught me how to think critically, how to think methodically, how to be able to articulate in concise sentences about what's important, and how to be able to summarize complex issues and to articulate them in simplistic manners. All skills, I think, that are necessary for senior leaders, whether you're in the military or not. The other thing that really impressed me and reflected on Kansas State was this tight alumni affiliation. Because I was serving on the Joint Staff when General Myers was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs at that time, back in 2000, after 9/11, 2001 to 2005 timeframe. And I think it was around 2004, there was a group of alum that were coming through Washington, D.C., visiting the Pentagon. General Myers, as a Kansas State alum graduate, had hosted them for lunch. And he put out this call across all of the Joint Staff saying, anybody who has any affiliation with Kansas State, you're invited to the lunch. So I saw it as an opportunity to get a free lunch, but lo and behold, I had a great chance to meet some of the regents and senior professors from Kansas State, thanks to what General Myers had done. So these are some great reflections and some great times that I've had here.
Thank you. Okay, well, we're not going to waste any time. As I said, we don't have much time, so let's get right to it. We're going to talk about some really crucial issues in higher education today, and one in particular, it's like the elephant in the room, is funding and the shrinking portion of the pie that is public funds for higher education, and the question of privatization of public institutions. So my first question really, Dr. Peterson, if you could start us off with, what is happening in higher education with funding and the defunding of higher education?
So one of the most frequent questions I get from people when I'm talking, whether it's in Georgia or here in Kansas, is why is the cost of education going up so rapidly? The reality is the cost of higher education is not going up. The portion that's being funded by individuals, by parents and by students is what's going up because the state appropriations are going down. I'm not certain what the situation here is at K-State, but I know at Georgia Tech, we're educating more students for less money than we did 8 years ago. And a lot of that happens, again, because of the state reduction in state funds. Before I was at Georgia Tech, I was the chancellor at the University of Colorado at Boulder for about 3 years, and I started July 1st, and the first all-campus address was when the students came back. It was in the first week in September, the last week in August, and I remember at that address I made a statement that we needed to find a sustainable financial model for higher education. University of Colorado at that time had a budget that was about $1.2 billion, and $85 million came from the state. That was about 7% of the overall budget. And I said that we needed to find a sustainable financial model, and during the Q&A, one of the people in the audience said, so what are some ideas that you have? And I talked about a couple of things. One of the things I mentioned was a public authority, that perhaps the university could be like a public authority, how hospitals run, where the university contracts with the state to provide. K-State would provide 250 MBAs and 1,000 engineers and those types of things. The next morning, I got a call from Governor Bill Ritter, who didn't think that was such a good idea. So when we talk about privatization as a way of funding, I think you have to think about it realistically. What is the endowment income for the institute? So start with how much resources does K-State get from the state? What is the income on the endowment? What is the income on the tuition? And if you were going to try to replace those state appropriations, how much would you have to either increase the tuition or grow the endowment? And those numbers are staggering. For Georgia Tech, our endowment's about $2 billion. If we privatized, we'd have to increase the endowment to about $6 billion or triple the tuition. So there's some room in tuition, but for us in Georgia, it's not really practical. I'm not sure that it's practical here. Colorado today gets $45 million on a $1.2 billion budget.
So when you start talking about compensating or making up that difference as the public portion begins to shrink, Dr. Hall, could you tell us how would that impact access in terms of cost and tuition for students?
Well, that is the major problem, and I really think it is a problem that as a society we have to come to grips with, because in essence we're making a choice. We're making a choice that higher education is going to have to survive more on its own. And when you make that decision, then you're basically saying that many individuals in the society will not have access and will not be able to afford quality education. I mean, higher education has always supposed to have been the equalizer to be able to transform lives. And if we continue down the pattern we're on, it will become a system where those who are privileged and rich and have access to resources will be able to access this wonderful gem, and those who do not have that will not be able to do so. Now, clearly the federal government plays a role through Pell Grants, and the state funding plays a role, but I do think it's time for us to kind of go back to the original principle that education cannot be this value that is meted out to certain individuals. It has to be available for all. And even with state budgets shrinking, we have to elevate the importance of higher education or we will lose our way. At the University of the Virgin Islands, I came in with the notion that we were going to try to keep tuition at a very low level because it is the only university in the Virgin Islands, and therefore this access notion becomes critical. But as the funding from the local government had continuously gone down, we had to start raising tuition pretty much on a yearly basis, and that was contrary to the position that we wanted to take. And when I think about the fact that our tuition is still extremely low compared to other institutions, there are still students who every year we end up losing because they can't afford to pay a relatively, our tuition per year is around $5,000, if you can imagine that. But yet, for certain students, that is still a stretch, even with some receiving Pell Grants and others not being able to receive it. So as a nation, we really have to elevate the importance of higher education, and it's not just because of the degrees. The more educated a populace is, the greater the chances for that society to not only grow economically, but socially and otherwise. So many of the problems we face as a society is a product of not having come to grips with making sure higher education is available to all.
Thank you. I did want to ask Lieutenant General, you talked to me a little bit about, you have a different perspective at West Point where you deal with funding issues. Could you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like for you? Mm-hmm.
Certainly, Mary. So we are a public institution. We're funded by the federal budget, and it's significant enough where all of our students' tuition is paid. It only costs them 5 years of their life in service to our nation, but it's still covered. Nonetheless, our budgets will normally increase and decrease based on where the Department of Defense budget is at any particular time. And there is a standardized cost in educating each particular student. So as budgets decrease, then we really have to watch carefully what our resources are and how we'll pay for that. One good thing that's happening, I think, in all public institutions, to include the federal, is that our graduates are in the process of donating in support of their institution, but it's what we call a margin of excellence. It brings government education to a certain standard, but the additional resources that come in through graduates brings us to the next level. And that manifests in semester abroad studies and other internships and things like that. But the one thing I think that's an important point to make in public institutions is it's the commitment of our federal government and the people of the United States to the future of America and to the future of their leaders. And I think you can say that also applies at the state level as well. And I think that's an important statement that our governments have to make, that if you invest into the future leaders of our nation, if you invest in the future leaders of our states, that it's an important investment that they're really making.
Okay, well, we talked a little bit about access, Dr. Hall. I wanted to take the conversation a little bit further with access and talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion, where access is involved in getting a more diverse faculty, more diverse student body. That's a big issue on college campuses today. Students are demanding it. Can you talk to us a little bit about the significance and importance of that?
Well, it is extremely significant, and it is a challenge that the society has, I think, unfortunately not fully come to grips with. It was an issue when myself and others arrived here in 1968. It was one of the issues we petitioned the university around, that we protested about, tried to, or engaged President McCain at that time. And as I shared with the Black Student Union leaders who were here yesterday at a reception, I think that combination of engaging the administration in a very direct and cooperative way, and sometimes through protests, we were able to put the issue of inclusion and diversity on the institution's agenda. And yet today we're still struggling with those sorts of issues. And it goes to the kind of fundamental vision of higher education. It is, again, something, I mean, higher education is one of those rare places where you can bring people together who have very divergent ideas, people who come from different parts of the world, and you can ask them to sit at the same table and have discussions about very sensitive and volatile issues. Not to mention, you can ask them to live together in the same dorms or the same facilities. And that's a real privilege that, unfortunately, certain communities don't have, certain religious institutions don't have. Our religious institutions, unfortunately, end up being more segregated than the society. But higher education, when it really takes on this banner of inclusion and diversity, is able to create an environment where we can come to grips with some of those issues. And it becomes something that, unless we really grapple with in a very direct way, then some of the original sins of this society will continue to perpetuate themselves. And I know that my personal life was transformed because I was able to go to an institution of this sort and meet people who I normally would not have met. And I believe that that is the story of so many other individuals. But I think what we fail to look at, or don't look at enough, is that not only was my life transformed, but I hope that my presence in the institution exposed other individuals to a culture or history, a person who they would not have had that interaction with. So it is an area where we've made tremendous progress, but it is still an area that is easy for us to talk about in broad terms, but often not something that we're willing to grapple with on a day in and day out basis, so that we can fashion the type of society that we really need.
Well, students certainly are demanding it. As all of you know, that students have been protesting on campus after campus about increasing diverse faculty numbers. Dr. Peterson, could you talk to us a little bit about what is the challenge in terms of increasing the number of minority faculty? Why is that such a challenge for an institution?
Well, at Georgia Tech, only 22% of our tenure track faculty are women. And so at our institution, women are considered and classified as minority faculty. I think part of the challenge is numbers. The number of African Americans and women that are pursuing graduate degrees in engineering and hard sciences is a relatively small number. I think there's a lot of things that we can do to help that. 8 years ago, when I arrived at Georgia Tech, our freshman class was 30%, just under 30% female, and this fall's freshman class will be 42% female. We've seen concomitant increases in number of African American and Hispanic students, and a lot of that is the result of some programs. I'd like to say it's because of all the great things we've done since I've been at Georgia Tech, but the reality is a lot of it is the result of things that my predecessors did. And the biggest thing that we've done to encourage that enrollment increase is the development of summer programs. We have over 75 programs that we offer in the summer for women, underrepresented minorities, to expose them to science and engineering, computing, and mathematics so that they can see that these fields can actually be fun. And more often than not, when I go to freshman convocation and talk to some of our incoming freshmen, whether it's black students or women or Hispanics, and ask them, why did you decide to come to Georgia Tech? They said, well, I went to a summer camp on computing when I was in 8th grade. So these are programs that are week-long or 3-week-long programs that are focused on middle school kids primarily, that allows them to, first of all, understand that science, engineering, computing, math can actually be fun. But probably more important is that it allows them to envision themselves on a college campus like Georgia Tech, to see the campus and actually see themselves in that location and being successful in that type of an environment. It continues to be a challenge. The competition for minority faculty is very, very steep, as it is for minority graduate students. But it's a task, a challenge that we can rise to, and a challenge that we can overcome.
Thank you. Among the student body, I guess faculty as well, there's also this issue of cultural competence. And so, Lieutenant General, can you talk to us a little bit about, can you actually change a cultural climate to embrace tolerance and diversity? How do you guys deal with that at West Point?
Well, that's a great question, Maria. If you're going to change a culture, then you have to change behavior. If you're going to change behavior, then you have to create some reflection and introspection. And then if you're going to create the reflection and introspection so that you can see where you are as compared to where you ought to be, you got to engage in some type of dynamic, open, honest dialogue that really allows people within that small group to be candid with each other. Normally, it's in a small group that's facilitated by a peer facilitator. So that's the process. So at West Point, we feel character and character development is so important to the culture that when somebody graduates, they should have internalized the values of, in our case, the values of duty and honor and country, and loyalty, duty, respect, which include the values of our Army. So where they are when they first come into the military academy as compared to where they are to those values to be internalization is the character development process that needs to take place. So we try to work that in a lot of our different programs that we have, but really, if you get some reflection and introspection, usually with a mentor that can really end up with behavioral change, then ultimately you're going to be able to change a culture and make a difference. I would say this too, if I could, Maria.
Yes.
We think diversity is so tremendously important in the military for a number of reasons. Most important is that when we take our oath of office, all the soldiers will swear allegiance to the Constitution, which puts the military in a subordinate relationship to our civil authorities who are elected by the American people. So in the profession of arms, our client is the American people. And it's so important that we have a relationship with our client, a relationship that's built on trust. For the last 40 years, we've had an all-volunteer Army. And through the all-volunteer Army, the Army became what the nation provided, but which is not necessarily represented to what the nation is. And as a result, our Army has some significant gaps in its diversity with its client, the American people, who they swear to uphold and defend. And that can be a terrible indictment if we're not representing all of America. So the diversity of our Army and the diversity of the United States Military Academy that inputs officers into the Army becomes so tremendously important because of our client, the the American people.
I just want to touch on this just a little bit more. Our university leaders getting together and talking about best practices, some of the things that the Lieutenant General was talking about in ways to infuse diversity and inclusion on campus. Is this an ongoing topic amongst diversity leaders? Dr. Peterson?
Yes, absolutely. When the University of Missouri football team, some maybe 2 years ago, protested, that happened to be about 2 weeks before the Association of American University Presidents meeting. So AAU is 62 public and private universities, the presidents meet, and we essentially scrapped the entire agenda and spent 2 days talking about what we were doing on our campuses, how we could improve the climate, how we could avoid a situation like that particular one. And it's amazing, you get 62 or 3 or 4 university presidents together, and they spend 2 days, and then they finally realize that it's really about communication and respect. That if you can, and the general talked about that a little bit, President Hall talked about it, if people will just work to try to understand and respect each other and talk to each other, so that you realize that these are human beings, they have the same desires that everyone else. They want to be heard, they want to have equal opportunity, and they want to be treated with dignity. And so it was interesting that it really kind of day and a half or so boiled down to talk to your students, communicate with your students, allow them to voice their concerns and their opinions and their thoughts and their dreams and their hopes. And that provides an outlet and doesn't, I'm an engineer, so it doesn't allow the pressure to build so much that you have an explosion.
We have about 2 minutes left on this question. I did want to ask about curriculum and infusing diversity and inclusion into curriculum. Dr. Hall, is that something that's being talked about, and are you guys doing that kind of thing?
It is certainly being talked about, and it is something that we can point to examples where courses are being offered on this topic and other things are occurring on the curriculum level. But I really do think higher education has to step back and ask the fundamental question, why? And let's just use 1968 as a marker, not to say that's the issue, but why in these 40-some years we're still grappling with it. I mean, one would hope that this would be such a minor issue now, and it's still a fundamental issue. And I will give my sense of why in that regard. One, it has to be really ingrained into the mission and fabric of the institution. It is one thing to kind of focus on the notion that we are here to educate students' minds, and I think higher education feels very comfortable in that particular arena. But we also need to develop the emotional and spiritual intelligence of our students as well, and to claim that. And because those things are harder to measure, we tend to feel as if, well, that's going to happen on its own. Students will gain those things just by taking general education. And I think we have to get to the point where we make that a part of our motto. At the University of the Virgin Islands, our strategic plan says that we are to produce students who are academically excellent, globally sensitive, entrepreneurially focused, emotionally and spiritually balanced, and willing to serve the world. And so that guides what we're doing every day. And so that says to us that our curriculum has to reflect those values. How are we exposing students to those things? It says that we should be looking at our extracurricular activities and seeing as if we are integrating it into those areas. So curriculum does not develop outside of a mission and a vision. And it doesn't develop in a way that will be meaningful unless our reward systems and unless the things that we value are also influencing those sorts of things. So I think we need to think about what is the mission and vision of our institution, and is it broad enough to incorporate those sorts of things, or are we reacting to incidents And too much of the latter keeps us from making the type of progress that we need.
You talk about values and incidents, that great transition into what we want to talk about next, and that is sexual assaults on college campuses. And that issue has gained a lot of attention, especially after the U.S. Department of Education released its list of schools that were under federal investigation for how they handled sexual assault. And that list has grown. I think it came out in 2014. It has since grown significantly. And now the nation's watching college campuses and how they do deal with this. What are some of the ways that our colleges and universities are dealing with this very important issue of sexual assault on college campuses? Dr. Peterson, could you please start?
So I don't want to ruin the flow here, but I'd be very interested to hear what the general has to say about this, and then I'll add some
Okay,
comments.
that's
And the
fine.
reason is because the academies are about 10 years ahead
Yes.
of the rest of the universities. The academies have been dealing with this issue for quite some time, a couple of issues that were very public. And so, General, I'd defer to you, and then I'll follow up with you.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Well, this has been in the...
That didn't sound very sincere, General. We've learned a lot from the academies and how you're handling.
Well, no. So it's been I'm glad it's in the public domain, because it's one of those things I think that really has to be discussed and has to talk about. And of course, United States Military Care and all the service academies are in the public domain, and it's got a lot of attention. It really grabbed the attention about 7 or 8 years ago with Congress. And I remember testifying when I had another position at West Point as a one-star. And I really sensed the emotion of Congress with the military academies in the sexual assaults that were being reported, and the importance for us to address this particular issue. And then attention kind of shifted historically a little bit over to the Army at large and all the other services. And then when I came on board 3 years ago as a superintendent, the Army was trying to get their arms around this, and they understood that it was going to take leadership from the most senior levels of the Army all the way down through leaders of throughout the entire organization to really make a difference. The Army did a great job of coming up with what they thought was a strategy. This is also important, at least in the Army, because socially we've gone through some changes here recently. We had the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and now the transgender policies that are in the Army. But probably most important is the removal of the combat exclusion law, which will allow women to go into all areas of the United States in all the different services, and there's nothing that's banned for them. So all of our units, even our infantry units and our armor units, are now going to be integrated, which I personally think that's a good thing. But nonetheless, if you're going to get after this is also to change the culture, you got to change behavior. And then people, and one of those values that we talk about that really forces the change is the value of respect, so that we respect each other. And we don't see, so the best teams, and I remember when I was in Iraq, there were some great teams that were out there that were gender integrated teams. And like the route clearance teams that were commanded by women engineers, and they had men and women together. And those teams were really close. They didn't see each other within that team as a man or a woman. They saw themselves as teammates, and they worked together as teammates. And that's kind of the ideal situation that you really want to get to. But really the strategy that we are looking at is one that addresses prevention. And that's the hardest part, because that's the changing the culture and changing behavior based on the value set of the student when they come to the university, and how that value has got to evolve over time so that they understand the importance of respect. And then when an incident occurs, there's so much that's got to take place, and one of the most important things is advocacy. So that we provide the alleged victim the proper advocacy that can address the issue in a very respectful way. And then the other element of this is the investigation and prosecution, so that we can do the proper investigation with all of the sensitivities that take place during an investigation, and that we lay out all the different options for the victim or the alleged victim, and then we can proceed with the right prosecution to make sure that it's prosecuted And because I remember when I did the testimony, one of the congressmen looked me in the eye, pointed his finger and said, "General, until you see this as a criminal act, you'll never be able to fix this." So it was important for us to define what the assault was and what a sexual assault was and that sort of thing. Finally, I think this is a significant issue, and this goes back to prevention, because some of our surveys that we have taken, as we look at assaults and how assaults are reporting, there's a deterrent for someone to want to report this for a number of different reasons. If we provide the right climate that allows reporting to occur, that protects the alleged victim, and at the same time that they don't experience a lot of the retaliation, reprisal, particularly on social media, then we're going to make progress. But until it's reported, you have someone that's really going through some trauma and some suffering, and there's no one there that's really providing some assistance for them. And I think that's why the reporting is tremendously important. But if you're going to change that behavior, the precursor to an assault will be harassment. And we really have got to address harassing type behavior. And then before harassment is what we call sexist comments. In our survey that we actually took, we had over 90% of our women, this is 2 years ago, who said that particular year that they took the survey had experienced sexist comments. And the sexist comments is inappropriate, unwanted comment addressed to one's gender. And until you address that type of behavior, you're not, that's where you really have to start to address that type of behavior and why that type of behavior is not proper. And then that'll help clean that up and clean up the harassment, which will ultimately address the assaults that take place. But this is an issue that all of us have to take on, and all universities, and I know universities are, and they're going through their own particular challenges, particularly through the investigation, prosecution issues that take place. But that's a key element of the strategy as well.
This idea of investigation and prosecution, a question that comes up often is, are universities and colleges really equipped to do that type of investigation and prosecution? And they're challenged with that nonetheless because of the law. Could you speak to that, sir?
Sure, and thank you, General. I didn't mean to pass that off to you, but we have learned a great deal from the academies because you were out in front on this issue. Several years ago, President Obama, Vice President Biden made public comments about statistics. 1 in 4, 1 in 5 young women were sexually assaulted before they graduated from college. And I think there were a lot of people in the country that didn't believe that. And there was a number of publications that kind of looked down on the survey, said it was only 2 universities. They were anonymous. But again, the Association of American Universities put together a survey of 27 of the institutions. Georgia Tech didn't participate in that because we are doing a statewide survey for all of the institutions in the state, and California was the same way. But these are Harvard, Princeton, MIT, Penn, number of the public universities. Then guess what? The number was the same, 1 in 4, 1 in 5. And it really becomes an issue. It really became an issue when the Office of Civil Rights, Department of Education Office of Civil Rights issued a Dear Colleague letter that gave a couple of directives to universities. And some people would say, well, that's not the law, that's just guidance. The guidance is pretty strong because if you don't follow the guidance, you could lose federal funds. So it's guidance that comes with a pretty heavy price. And the standard of evidence that they required, or that they said should be used at universities, is the preponderance of evidence, which is what is used in civil trials as opposed to beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what's used in criminal trials. We have opted, because of some of the concerns about whether or not universities are equipped to conduct these investigations. I chaired the system-wide policy on sexual violence and made a recommendation. We have a system-wide policy now and we hire outside investigators to help. We can't depend upon the prosecution and the legal authorities because they use a different standard of evidence, and their success rate has been relatively low. But we hire outside investigators to come in and interview the victim, the respondent, conduct an investigation, and then use that as part of our judicial process within the institution. And that has proved to be very helpful because we now have people that are investigating these incidences that actually are trained as investigators and know what to look for and know how to ask questions and know how to protect the rights of both the victim and the respondent.
Having to hire investigators and probably counselors as well to deal with aftermath of these incidents, cost-wise, how does that affect the university's funding?
I don't think we hired 2 new sexual advocates, sexual violence advocates on campus. We had 2, and we now have 4. I don't think we ever stopped to think about what the cost was of that because of the sheer numbers of students that we were seeing coming forward. As students started to, as victims started to see some results and some actions being taken by the university, we started to see the numbers grow. I don't think it's because we saw an increase in the number of sexual assaults. It was because people recognized that there was some action that was being taken and that they had a chance for some resolution of whatever the incident was.
Dr. Hall, do you have any comments on this issue?
Yes, I would, and it's very similar to the other issues that we've been talking about. I think the strength of the types of codes that one has at the institution becomes critical, and the seriousness in which we take complaints when they are filed and how they are processed. We do handle ours ourselves. We're a smaller institution, and we make sure that our Title IX investigators are trained not only internally but going to national conferences, et cetera. And we also, have I think, a very fair internal process. But to me, the core of this issue is not just how do we handle the situation once the complaint is filed, but what do we do ahead of time to try to keep these situations from occurring? And that's the whole issue of prevention and the whole issue of raising people's consciousness. And the thing that I think is just so critical is that men on college campuses, and we have to be candid, that sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, rape, et cetera, is generally a one-way street. And therefore, we have to look at why is this mentality prevalent among men on college campuses, but in society in general. And part of it is the fact that I don't think men on college campuses and men in general really understand the seriousness of the harm. We take, as you indicated, a sexual joke, a overture as just kind of part of what we're supposed to do as men. And we don't see the harm. And certainly when it gets to an even more severe situation where date rape or something of that sort occurs, we don't understand that that becomes something that that person doesn't just live with for a night, but live with for the rest of their lives. And we, out of our naivete, out of our insensitivity, alters and changes that person's life through some need that we think we have. So we have to do a better job on college campuses. We have to do a better job in society of getting people to understand the seriousness of the harm we inflict by those sorts of decisions, but also trying to change our mentality as men. Instead of objectifying women and seeing them as an object of our pleasure, but to see them as equal, worthy human beings who we have to value and treasure, even when we may disagree with them or even when there may be other issues going on. And again, like with diversity and some of the other issues we've talked about, unless we begin to deal with those kind of fundamental issues as what creates it, what allows us to operate from that mentality, then our codes and our processes will be important and will provide some healing for that victim and some justice for the victim, but it still means that we'll be going through this process for some time to come. And so I think universities have to examine what are those root causes and how do we focus on those root causes.
Lieutenant General, I just want to quickly ask this last question, if you could wrap us up here. So are college campuses safer in terms of sexual assault today than they were, like 10 years ago or say last 6 or 7 years when this really heated up? Are we getting there? What do you think?
Well, of course, obviously, I can speak to what's happening at West Point. I think that there's a couple of interesting dynamics. I think we're becoming much more sensitized to this issue and to this problem, both sides of the gender, male and female. Sometimes I see the pendulum going in the opposite direction, though. And what I refer to by that is it's gender avoidance, so that our men and women that are training together and working together are so sensitive that they may say or do something that may be misinterpreted wrong, that they avoid each other altogether. And in the Army, where you have mixed gender teams, where everybody is dependent upon each other, you can't force that type of polarization. So we got to bring the pendulum back to the middle, where everybody feels that they're a valued member of the team, that they feel that they can contribute, they feel that they are respected, and they feel safe and secure both emotionally and physically, and that's ultimately where we want to get to. So we have some work to do in that area. I'm very pleased to see our reporting is going up, which means that our command climate is facilitating and allowing that to occur. And I'm also very pleased to see grassroots organizations that are uprising, not only at West Point but other universities, because the students want to take ownership of this and they want to address it themselves. And even our president from the White House has a national campaign of universities. It's called It's On Us, which all of our universities, most of them are all part of as well. And collectively, we can learn from each other and do some great work. For example, we're doing a seminar this week on sexual harassment, sexual assault avoidance, and we're using some of the lecturers that the White House has provided for us. This one of them in particular is male masculinity. What does it mean to be what does masculinity mean for a male, so that you avoid those type of other things in that culture. But we're making progress, but 1 in 4 women are assaulted on college campuses today. We have a long way to go.
Thank you. Yes, sir. As we talk about college campuses and safety, that brings us right into the next issue that we want to talk about, and that is, across the country, states are considering legislation about whether or not to permit guns on college campuses, and several states have already done that. Concealed weapons on campus. I'm interested, what are your thoughts about the ideas of students, faculty, visitors carrying a concealed weapon on your campuses, and what is fueling this permission? Where are we going here? Dr. Hall, could you start, please?
Sure. This is not an issue that we have had any discussion about in the Virgin Islands, because I believe the senators and governor do not feel that is the answer, and so we have not had to even engage in it. My perspective is security on a college campus is important. We want our students to come to classes, and we want employees who work at a university to feel a sense of security and safety, or otherwise you really can't do the thing that you're called to do. But I do not believe that having guns on a college campus is the answer to the security issue. From my personal perspective, I think issues around security has to be delegated to those individuals who are trained and who, as a part of their profession, understand the safe use of weapons, and also understand law enforcement in general. If we feel that security and the other issues related to it can only be resolved by having every person armed, or having the majority of our students armed, then I really think that says a lot about where we've come as a society and something that should not be permitted. I respect the right embodied in the Constitution for individuals to bear arms, but there is no right that is absolute. And we have to understand that rights are about balancing other rights and balancing the needs of people in the society and making some hard choices. And educational environments are, from my standpoint, not the place where we should be promoting individuals bringing weapons, concealed or otherwise, to the academic environment. We are all very distressed by the fact that we do have individuals who come onto campuses with weapons and who have unfortunately taken innocent lives out of their sickness and rage. And that is something, as educators, we have to be very concerned about. But I don't think the answer is to go to the extreme and try to arm others as a way of preventing that. There is a middle ground, and we have to focus more on making sure that our campuses are safe using other mechanisms.
Dr. Peterson, I know that Georgia is not one of those states where concealed carry is permitted on campuses, but I think this was just an issue. They just talked about this recently. Can you share with us some of your thoughts on this?
So 8 years ago when I arrived at Georgia Tech, the first day on the job, I went to the Capitol to meet with some of the legislators, and one of the legislators there said that he promised me that he would keep the gun bill on college campuses. It would never come out of committee, and he was right. And every year for the past 8 years, there's been this inching up of where guns were allowed in the state of Georgia. This past year, the House and the Senate both passed a campus carry bill that allowed individuals to carry guns on campus if they were 21 years or older and had a permit. The governor vetoed it, thank goodness. I've been openly opposed to it. I don't think 18-year-olds, alcohol, and guns are a good mix. I'm probably caught in the middle here. It's not really an issue in the Virgin Islands. In the military academy, all of the individuals are highly trained, and so here we are. But the governor vetoed it. It will come up again next year, I'm sure. I don't know what form, but it'll come up. I just don't believe that in a college campus environment where you have so many young people living in close proximity with each other, learning to be the kinds of people that they're going to be, experiencing a lot of stress and pressure, hormones and alcohol, that it's an idea that makes sense. The pushback that I hear frequently, and it happened with one of our legislators several years ago, and he was unhappy with the position I took in opposition to guns, and he said, well, he was beating me up about the Second Amendment, that I didn't believe in the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms. And I said, well, Senator, are you going to allow guns to be on the floor of the House and Senate? And he said, no. And I said, well, then we agree. There are limitations on the Second Amendment. We just don't agree on where the boundaries are. I think it's a bad idea. I'm thankful to Governor Nathan Deal for vetoing it. And I hope if it comes up again next year, he will veto it once more.
Is there any way to keep a campus safe once you,
So our campuses, well, I'll use Georgia Tech because I know the numbers. The probability that there'll be a violent crime on the Georgia Tech campus is 1/5 of what it is in the rest of the city of Atlanta. We do not have a violent crime problem. What you hear about are a few incidents, Virginia Tech, other institutions where it's where there's been a very, very bad situation. I'm not sure arming the population is going to help in that situation. In fact, I don't believe it will.
if there were guns permitted on campus, do you think most students would carry a weapon on campus? I mean, is that something that you think your student body would actually do, Dr. Hall?
I think some would,
Yeah.
because any time you say to individuals this is your right and you should do it. There are some who are going to take advantage of it. I think the majority of students would not. But the fact that and I think that varies from state to state, as I said, in the Virgin Islands, that's not even being hotly debated. So I think, we probably would not face that. In other states where the right to bear arms and security issues are more intense, you probably would have more individuals doing it. The problem is that I think it begins to shift, our focus on who is responsible for security, and it also adds another vulnerability to the institution that, from my perspective, is not a good vulnerability to have. You have to imagine that we tend to make the argument that the reason this is needed is for security purposes. But what we fail to understand is that in academic environments, we are purposely asking people to disagree. When I was a law professor, if a student made an argument, my goal was to find another student to disagree with that person, because what I wanted them to do is to begin to analyze problems, and I'm going to push back, even when they're saying something that I agree with. And so in an environment where you are forcing people to get out their passions and ideas, to then have them armed is not consistent with what it is we're trying to create. So I would hope that most students would not, but I don't think that's an invitation that our legislators or governors should be sending to students.
Okay. And that basically brings us to conclude the questions we had for today, but I think we're going to then open it up for
All right, we indeed are. So let's thank our panel first.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
There are probably some other tough issues that campuses deal with, but I don't know what they are right now. I think you've done a pretty good job of going through those, and we thank you very much for the very thoughtful answers. So here are the rules of engagement for asking a question. You've got to approach the mic, tell us who you are, and you have one question. You can't do multiple part questions. And try to make it brief, please, because we'd like to get as many questions in as we possibly can before we close the session. So, first questioner.
I'm Dr. Kimathi Choma. I'm the Assistant Dean of Diversity, Recruitment, and Retention in the College of Arts and Sciences. And it sounded like the General wanted to respond to that question, so I would like to hear his answer also.
On diversity?
I think you're talking about the question on the gun question.
Terry.
Oh, on gun, oh. Yeah. Okay, yeah, no, thanks, Doctor, I appreciate it very much. What I would say is, I think, before we go all the way to arm students, I think there's other ways this can be addressed. One is prevention, and that is just to ensure that we have the proper access to our dormitories and to our academic buildings and things like that. And second is that if an event occurs, how can we respond quickly, particularly with an active shooter? And what we have at West Point is we have a series of a short, small guard force around the perimeter of the military academy where the cadets are, and they're armed and trained, obviously, so that if an event occurs, they can react within minutes, and they will be on the scene. Rather than having every student, shooting wildly, they're the ones who are armed legally and are trained to be able to address something like that. So those are, I think, ways that this type of issue can be addressed before we start arming students, with all the different risks associated with that my colleagues to the left pointed out.
Thank you.
Please.
Wilma Moore Black from Wichita, Kansas, a K-State graduate. What advice for encouragement do each of you have for students or returning adults who have this challenge of financing higher degrees, your doctoral degrees? What do they do?
Who wants to take?
So I'd encourage someone and it's interesting that you asked that question. finished my undergraduate degree, went to work, got married. My wife and I got married while we were in college, and actually worked on a master's degree and a PhD while I was working pretty much full-time. So there are a lot of paths and a lot of options, and I'd encourage people to explore those paths and options. Co-op programs, Georgia Tech, we have about 35% of our students that are co-op or interns, primarily co-op, and that can help pay for the education. It used to be that if you were a co-op student, you could work a semester, go to school a semester, and the tuition was such that you could pretty much pay your own way. That's not true anymore, again, because of the increase in tuition. But there are a lot of different non-traditional options for people that are separate and distinct from federal student financial aid. For graduate degrees, companies that assist with educational programs and pay some of the tuition. And I just encourage people to explore the options that could possibly work for their particular situation.
My answer would be much more self-serving, and it would be, Wilma, just come and enroll in the University of the Virgin Islands, where our tuition is low. We just started a hybrid PhD program in creative leadership. But the serious way is that I think educational institutions have to be much more flexible in addressing the population that you talk about. One, in our delivery, this PhD program that we created is a hybrid where much of it is online. We do have residency programs, and we have quite a number of working adults who have been away from higher education for some time, but they can afford coming for the residencies and yet still be able to do so much of the coursework online. And so the traditional delivery system doesn't always work for individuals who've been out of the higher education environment. So part of it is on us as developers of delivery programs to figure out how do we shape those programs so they fit more the lifestyle of individuals that you are talking about.
So I might just jump on that one. I talked about different programs, and President Hall mentioned some new approaches. We started a master's program, an online master's in computer science 2.5 years ago. Students can get a master's degree in computer science from Georgia Tech for under $7,000. We'll start the second program in data analytics, in either data analytics or cybersecurity master's degree in January. And we're starting to see more and more of those types of programs that will allow people to study at home for a greatly reduced price. This $7,000, if you were on campus in-state, it'd be $25,000. If you're out of state, it'd be $45,000. So we've graduated about 200 students and have over 4,000 students enrolled in the program today.
And I could make you an in-state resident, and you could get your and you can get your PhD for $5,000. So that's $2,000 less than his master's.
We're going to try to run it over here.
Good morning. My name is Katrina Lewison, and I graduated from West Point in 2000. Had the opportunity to serve in the Army for 11 years. And at West Point, I received a wonderful liberal arts education, as well as good job training that set me up for success to be a lieutenant in the Army. So now I'm a local businesswoman, and I have the opportunity to hire young people. And oftentimes what I see is that they come out of school, and they're not prepared for the real world, to have jobs. So I'm wondering if you can address how you can be more like West Point, these two gentlemen, and set your students up for success through internships or other methods so that they are prepared to have jobs and not just do more college.
Go ahead.
So thank you for your service, first of all. The opportunity to participate in co-op or internship programs is really invaluable. I mean, it allows people ask me sometimes, why should my son or daughter co-op or intern? And a lot of times the response they'll hear is because it'll help them learn what they want to do. And I think it's more important because it'll help them learn what they don't want to do. Because there's a lot more things that people don't want to do maybe than they want to do. That type of job experience, creates a more vibrant and robust educational experience when the students come back. We work hard and have increased our efforts in what our regions call the soft skills. I don't really think of them as soft skills. I think of them as life skills. It's just a continued challenge for us to try and prepare students for careers after college, because they live at home with their parents typically, and they're sheltered and protected, and they come to a university and we shelter and protect them a little bit still. That co-op internship or study abroad, so over half of our students study abroad, and that's an experience that goes a very, very long way towards helping them grow up, because then they are on their own. The last thing I'd say is, you said prepare them for a job. I don't like to think that we're preparing students for jobs. I like to think that we're preparing students for a career and for life. And so involvement in other activities, in the student government, some of the clubs or other types of activities can be very valuable.
Yeah, I would just like to echo especially the idea of cooperative education. Before coming to the Virgin Islands, I was both the Dean of Northeastern Law School and Provost at the university there, which is a kind of premier cooperative education program. And I certainly learned from that experience that exposing students to the workplace and giving them an opportunity to see how various businesses work not only allow them to make better choices, but they do come out better prepared for their careers and for various jobs. We have done something not quite as involved as that, but we have a research and technology park that attracts businesses to the Virgin Islands that are engaged in e-commerce and other forms of development. And we are now requiring the companies, as a part of the tax break that they get for relocating, to hire students as interns, to make them fellows so that they are preparing them for their company or for their industry. And I do feel that those types of connections where industry is working very close with the academy increases the opportunities that students will come out, prepared. The broader issue, as I raised before, is part of why that does not occur is, again, we are focused on making sure the students have the skills and have the intellectual development. But we have to be concerned about developing well-rounded individuals who understand what it means to be a leader, who understands how to work in teams. All of those things, from my perspective, go into the education process, and it makes them better prepared to deal with the issues that they will face once they graduate.
Trent.
Hi, first of all, thank you all for coming here today. I'm Trenton Kennedy. I'm the Student Body Vice President here at K-State. A number of my family members, and most recently my cousin Garrett, went to the Air Force Academy, so go Falcons. But by the time he graduated the Air Force Academy, a number of his fellow cadets had committed suicide due to the very high pressure that you're under at the academy and the very intense day-to-day. I just wanted to know and I know you're doing a lot, but what pointedly is West Point doing to improve the mental well-being of their students in such a high-stress environment?
Yeah, Trenton, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Well, we do understand it's a high-stress environment, and fortunately, our suicide numbers at West Point are not so much out of line from other universities and elsewhere. The Army itself, we have a huge issue within the Army, particularly with our veterans who've experienced some trauma overseas and some of these deployments with traumatic brain injuries coupled with that we're dealing with that type of issue, which is separate from the question that you asked for. But we have, fortunately at West Point, we do have a strong mental health team, and these are all paid and educated physicians and counselors, so that when there are issues with cadets, they're encouraged to go there. Matter of fact, our numbers of cadets attending are increasing, which we see as a good thing, to try to remove the stigma that if you're going to go to get some type of mental health assistance, that would indicate something. So eliminating that stigma, I think, was one of the most important things that we did. And the fact that we're seeing increased numbers that are going is another good thing. And then we also have cadet counselors particularly in the summer. So that's what our cadets themselves do. So they're very sensitive to some of the new cadets that are having some challenges and issues, and then they make themselves available, because sometimes cadets will approach each other before they'll approach a doctor or physician. And then, of course, our coaches have a lot of education and training, because we have a number of our students who are athletes, and for them to consult with some of their personal issues with the coaches, which they'll probably do before they will with the military chain of command, it's important that our coaches know how to deal with some of those challenges and issues as well. But we do recognize the pressures and this generation that's coming in there trying to deal with these type of pressures, and to provide them all the assistance from many different sources that we can.
Please.
Good evening. My name is Taj Bremer, and I am Vice President of the Black Student Union here on campus. And my question is, with the latest blackface incident happening here on Kansas State, does your campus hold any anti-racism policies to ensure incidents like this does not happen?
Yes, they're in the Student Code of Conduct. We have both an organizational code and the individual student code of conduct, and they are not specifically called out in that particular manner, but those types of activities would fall within the code of conduct. We had an incident last fall that we had to address, not exactly like the one that happened here, but somewhat similar. So that falls within our traditional and code of conduct. We have since modified the code of conduct so that organizations can be held responsible for the actions of a few members of that organization if they have created a climate that allows particular issues or events to arise. Before the leadership, prior to the change, the leadership of the organization had to be aware of the conduct. So we changed that.
We also have in our code of conduct language that indicates that the goal of the university and of the students is to respect each other and respect the differences that exist, and that if individuals engage in language or activities that threaten, intimidate others, that they can be disciplined for that. I do think that even with that type of language in the code, that often falls short in getting to the point of, as I said earlier, sensitizing students as to what their responsibilities are. This is another area where we have to balance the free speech rights that students have with what I call your community obligation of trying to make sure that you are not making this environment an uncomfortable place for others. And some of that can be legislated through codes of conduct, but so much of that is really our educational agenda. And when I see those types of incidents occur and know there is no perfect institution, it should always be a reflection that we're not doing everything we should be doing, because when one student engages in activity of that sort, it's usually a reflection that others may feel and think the same. And our goal has to be, how do we get at the core of that concern so that more students have I would say, a more enlightened understanding of how you deal with differences.
And I would just add one unique thing that we have is a committee of cadets that they call it the Respect Committee. And they're responsible for a number of different programs and diverse programs that come through West Point. But if an incident, and they're also responsible for the education of the core cadets, so that all the cadets will go through each semester, a couple of classes. And this is the type of event that's designed to create that reflection and introspection. And when an event occurs, after it's investigated, assuming the cadet was at fault, then the cadet would not only have some degree of punishment, but the cadet will then be entered into a mentorship program. And they must successfully complete the mentorship program in order to remain at the academy. And the mentorship program is forced reflection and introspection and a number of other different programs and projects. And it's finally approved from our Commandant of Cadets, and they have to successfully complete that. If they don't, then they don't remain at West Point, because that's the type of leader we don't need in the Army.
Please.
Hi, my name is Michaela, and I'm an officer with the K-State Student Veterans Organization here on campus. Within the last 6 months, roughly, we've had 2 separate suicides, both veterans. Both, from our understanding, lived on campus housing, and both were as active as they could be on campus. However, it was sudden, and we could not have predicted it. When it comes to veterans and non-traditional student issues, that is a diversity topic that many people don't think to address, in my opinion. And oftentimes, veterans feel like they're left behind in terms of mental health and diversity initiatives on campus. What do you believe, and this isn't necessarily a question for General Caslen, because I know all about SHARP and ACE training, trust me. But instead, for Dr. Peterson and Dr. Hall, what initiatives do you believe need to be put in place to ensure that veterans and non-traditional students feel more included on campus?
So we just undertook it's actually a national initiative to end suicide. For us, it's tech, and suicide together. My wife is actually very involved and engaged in that. We have reached out to the Office of Veterans Services, which was a new office that we just opened about 4 years ago. Not because we've seen suicides among the veterans, but because we recognize that they are a population that is perhaps in greater danger than the traditional 18-year-olds. But I think we'll see nationally the whole issue of suicides on campus gain more and more visibility, in much the same way we've seen sexual violence. One of the things that the group of students came to me and expressed concern about was the fact that they don't know about suicides on campus. When a suicide occurs, there was some concern that we were trying to hide or play it down to avoid bad press, and just making them aware that that's not the case. There's documented evidence that too much attention to a suicide can generate copycats, and then the second part is to respect the rights and wishes of the family, because typically the family doesn't want any sort of press or notification about it. But we've got an active program that we just started this fall. It was a result of a student-led effort to try to focus on suicide prevention on campus. Still in the early stages.
This is certainly an area where I can't speak with great experience or authority for 2 reasons. Number one, we've been very fortunate, and this is my 8th year, and we have not had a suicide in that time period. And from talking to my predecessors, we've have not had one before then. We have a very small veteran population at the university. So what I say is just based on theoretical approaches and not based on our own experience. And it would be that just as we provide tremendous financial support for veterans, both at the federal level and at the local level, we have a special scholarship or tuition remission for veterans, that just as we can provide the financial support so that individuals can seek higher education, we need to make sure that those other types of supports are in place as well. But because in our situation there isn't a large population and there haven't been some specific issues, we have not developed a specific program in regards to inclusion. I would say in regards to the non-traditional student in general, universities really do have to understand that every student coming to the university is not a 18-year-old coming directly from college or from high school. At the University of the Virgin Islands, we are the only university in the Virgin Islands, so we have to address the needs of what we call the traditional student, but also working adults. And that population at the University of the Virgin Islands is significant. So we have to make sure when we schedule classes that we are accommodating those individuals who can't come in the day. And these are not continuing ed classes. These are the fundamental core courses that we have to offer. And our struggle, because of the financial issue that we talked about earlier, is making sure the services that we provide to the students who are coming in the day are also available for students who are taking a lot of their courses in the evening. So that's been our struggle, not so much do we have programs that are available for students who are the non-traditional individual, but are those services available throughout the day and the evening for that student who might not be able to come during the day.
So we're at the point where we have time for one more question. We've got, looks like 3 people that would like to ask questions. So the way, I'm sorry? Okay, please.
Okay. Hi, my name is Joel Blankenship. I was a born scholar in Kyrgyzstan last year, and I also am a junior class-wise in political science history, and I would be a Russian major if we had it, which ties into my next question. I'm going to draw on 2 statistics from an article in The Atlantic I read while I was abroad. The first one is in 2015, there's only 7% of students involved in language courses, and that's the first decline in about 20 years. And then also in 2013, roughly 98,000 US college students were taking French courses. Just 64, on the other hand, were studying Bengali. Yet globally, 193 million people speak Bengali, while 75 million speak French. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think the role of foreign language study ought to be in universities if the goal is to create globally minded leaders? And what can universities do to reverse this trend, especially regarding strategic languages, mine being Russian?
So I'll start. We're very fortunate at Georgia Tech that about 45% of our students study a foreign language before they graduate. The most popular language is Mandarin. We have a joint program with Emory University so that our students can take Emory language courses and their students can take some of our language courses, foreign language courses, for free on a space available basis. Probably the thing that helps encourage the students to study a foreign language more than anything else is the active study abroad program that we had. As I mentioned earlier, over half of our undergraduates will participate in a study abroad before they graduate. And it's not just study abroad in Europe. It's study abroad in some of the places that you've talked about, in Asia, in some of the Baltic states. And that desire to study abroad comes with it a need for a command of languages.
You know, what I think the question reflects is that our language curriculum and department is a reflection of times gone by, where French and Spanish were kind of the core ways in which we wanted to expose students to the world. And we have come to realize that that's not the world. That's a slice of the world. And as educational institutions, we haven't made the adjustment. And we need to be devoting more resources to making sure that we could expose students to the multiple, unlimited languages of the world. And the way you framed your question is what we talk about. As I said myself, I mean, part of our goal is to make our students, globally sensitive. Well, part of making them globally sensitive is to have study away and study abroads and to bring students from other parts of the world to our campuses. But another part of it is trying to make sure that we have a diverse offering of language courses. And I would argue that that's certainly a weakness that we have at the institution. And we need to do a better job in that regard, because if we want to develop leaders of the world, then we have to expose them to the culture of the world and not just, the culture of 2 countries. And I know this is unrelated totally to your question, but I'm going to use this opportunity to introduce two people in the room who are just very special to me. My wife, Dr. Marilyn Braithwaite Hall, who came with me on this trip. I am glad to... She is the love of my life, even though I didn't meet her here at Kansas State. And my roommate and college teammate, Jack Thomas, who we came here together with. There are a number of other special people who are here, and since I'm hogging the time, I won't name all of them, but I am really honored to have all of them to come out for this event.
Thank you, Dr. Hall.
Joe, I'll just jump on your bandwagon here for a second, because here at West Point, taking 1 year of foreign language is a mandatory course, part of our core curriculum, and if you're a liberal arts major, you have to take a second year. 10% of our students will study abroad a semester, and we'll send, last summer we had 25% of our students did an internship, and 1/3 of them were overseas. And the reason this is so important for us, and similar to what Dr. Hall was saying, is because we have to understand the culture of the environments that we're fighting in. And I think the greatest contribution of our ground forces over the last 15 years in Iraq and Afghanistan was not so much bringing combat power to influence and defeat somebody against their will, but our greatest contribution was the ability to understand the complexity of the environment. And once you understand its complexity, have the interpersonal skills to develop relationships, because our effectiveness was in the relationships that we developed within different indigenous units as compared to bringing force of will through combat power. And understanding cultures is so essentially important to be able to develop those relationships, understand what's going on, and then to bring that effectiveness to bear. So we really think that's tremendously important for that reason. And I just want to point out, it's very similar to what Dr. Hall was saying. He's talking about the culture of the world. We're talking about understanding cultures that we put ground forces in the middle of.
So I apologize. That's the last question. Okay, go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead. Go.
Thank you for giving me the time.
Be quick.
And it's a great pleasure learning from all of you, and thank you very much. And I think we need more of this within. My name is Shuaibu Umar. I'm a K-State graduate, and my question goes to Dr. Peterson. You mentioned none of your parents went to college. So what motivates you? What was the zeal, or was it mentoring, or can you explain, please? And my question to Dr. Hall, how many mentors do you have? And how do you encourage mentoring? Thank you very much.
So I probably could have done without that question. I mentioned that I came up with my best friend's father when he brought us to the open house. I'd like to say that I aspire to some, higher goals for education, but I wanted to play football, and I didn't want to go to Vietnam. And those were two influential factors in my decision to go to college. I'd like to be, I'd like to have something that's a little more philosophical perhaps, but those were two pretty heavy influences. I wanted to be an engineer, wanted to be involved in athletics, and some of the other options at the time the draft was still in place were not first on my list.
In regards to the number of mentors I have, it would be an endless number. I think I've been fortunate at each stage of my life and development that there have been people in my life who saw my potential and saw sometimes more potential in me than I felt I possessed. That was certainly true here at this institution. My freshman coach, basketball coach Larry Waggle, is here, I believe, and he served as a...
Hey, Larry.
He served as a mentor, and Jack Hartman was my coach at that time, and his daughter is the chief of staff or chair of this event, certainly. And when you use the word mentor, you sometimes think, well, I'm in a one-on-one relationship with that person. But mentor, in my sense, are broader than that. It's people who force you, either through confrontation, but sometimes through encouragement, to try to develop and reach your full potential. And being an athlete, you have numerous coaches who serve in that role, but also there have been academic leaders and people who went out of their way to encourage me and inspire me. And I still have them today. As president of a university, I look to other presidents to guide me, and I certainly have other individuals in my personal life who serve as mentors. So I really would encourage you and would encourage others to, seek out individuals who can really be a source of support and ultimately a blessing on your life's journey.
General Caslen, do you have anything to offer along the lines of mentorship? You may get the last word here.
I wouldn't be here, sir.
My mentorship, actually. So.
I wouldn't be here right now if I wasn't mentored by this guy over here on the right. So.
Okay, Dr. Peterson, Dr. Hall, General Caslen, Maria Williams, thank you all. Our moderator, thank you all so much for driving to Manhattan, Kansas, to be with us today discussing some very, very difficult issues, but with a lot of clarity. We really much appreciate it. Thank you.